Hello everybody, my name is Caitlin and welcome back to my channel where we talk about all things horror, and today I'm giving my review of the new indie horror film that's taking the internet by storm, The Outwaters. The Outwaters is the latest film in this trend that's happening in the horror genre where you have these very low budget indie films that are coming out. These are films that are getting made on budgets of anywhere from $10,000 to $15,000. They raise the funds independently, either through crowdsourcing or independent producers. They get limited theatrical releasing, and they rely heavily on social media and getting the hype build up online in order to get audiences to go see these films. These are films like Terrifier 2, Skinamarink, Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey, and The Outwaters is another one of these films. The Outwaters is essentially a found footage film about a group of artist friends who go out into the desert to film a music video, and of course all hell breaks loose. If you're aware of the marketing or just the general discourse that's happening around this film on social media, you'll likely know that this film is being compared a lot to Skinamarink. A lot of the comparisons are around the fact that these are two very low budget films that have very experimental elements to them. Personally, I actually enjoyed Skinamarink a lot more than The Outwaters. To me, Skinamarink is much more of a traditional experimental film, whereas I would argue that The Outwaters isn't really experimental. It has some experimental elements towards the latter half of the film, but overall it really is just a traditional found footage film. And I will also say right off the bat here that nothing happens in this movie for an hour. Well, stuff happens, but nothing horrific or scary. This is a movie that's going to make you wait for the gore and the craziness. So if that is not your jam, then I suggest probably skipping The Outwaters. And even when the craziness does start happening, the film is very dark. A lot of it takes place at night and you're not really seeing what's happening. The characters are only equipped with these tiny little flashlights, and the flashlights do not provide a lot of light. So you're only getting brief glimpses of the horror that the characters are experiencing. It relies much more heavily on the audio and giving you auditory scares. I mean, I will say I know people that have watched this film and liked it way more than I did. So I would say if you already have a subscription to Screambox, which is where this is now streaming, give it a chance if you're interested. I would not say to go see this in theaters. I think streaming it is perfectly fine. And just go into it knowing that it's gonna take a while before anything really starts to happen. The main character is this guy named Robbie, who is also the film's writer, director, producer, cinematographer, editor, costume designer, basically did everything, which is admirable, but I also always get a little nervous when I see that the director also has all of these other hats on set. Just speaking as someone that makes films, I know how easy it is when you are doing everything to just get lost in your own subjectivity and your own thinking about the film. And sometimes it can get really hard to detach yourself from the story and have a more objective viewpoint. Like, the story makes sense to me as the filmmaker, but is it gonna make sense to the audience? And that's kind of what I felt like was happening with this film, because there are a lot of elements that are thrown in here, but I wasn't entirely sure how it all connected together and what the grand theme or narrative of The Outwaters is supposed to be. The film spends a lot of time setting up its characters. Again, you spend really the first hour and 10 minutes with the characters in their daily lives before they go out to the desert. You see them hanging out with each other and talking about the project that they're going to go film. There are a few scenes with Robbie and his mom. There are scenes with him and his brother. Well, I think it was his mom and brother. I'm not entirely sure. And that was one of the odd things about the film, is that it spent so much time introducing the five main characters, but I feel like I don't know who these people are, really. They give you little glimpses of their personal life. Most of it is done through exposition. But it was weird. Going through the film, I did not feel connected to any of the characters. I actually had a hard time telling some of them apart. So that was a bit odd. Had it been one of those films where it's going to take its time to develop the characters so that you as an audience form an attachment to them, and then when bad things start happening, you really feel for them. Like, that's a narrative choice that can certainly work. However, that's not what I got here. And I don't know if it was just because of the limitation of the found footage genre. The found footage genre doesn't really allow for that kind of deep character study that it felt like this film wanted to do. So throughout the film, I just found myself not really caring about the characters. I'm gonna start getting into spoilers from here. So if you haven't seen the film and you want to, click off now. In addition to the lack of character depth, I also had a really hard time understanding what the themes of this film was supposed to be. The film sets up at the beginning, even before the characters go out into the desert, that there's something odd happening with the environment. There's a lot of earthquakes, there's a lot of really heavy thunderstorms. When they do get to the desert, they also notice that the ground feels kind of weird, it's shaking, it's vibrating, and even the animals are acting weird. They keep running into this pack of, I think, donkey or mules. So there's a lot of weirdness happening with the environment. And so at first I was like, oh, okay, is this gonna be like an eco-horror film? Is it gonna have an environmental message to it? There's also a lot of imagery and symbolism and discussions around motherhood. The characters frequently bring up their parents. The woman who is a singer mentions that her mom has passed away. There's stuff with Robbie's mom as well. There are other characters that once all hell starts breaking loose, they're running around and calling for their mothers. And it feels like the imagery is connecting to motherhood as well, right? Even in just the symbol of the full moon. More explicitly, there are scenes where characters are in very dark, womb-like spaces. And when the characters come out of this space, they're covered in this gooey-like substance that feels very reminiscent of something like afterbirth. So I was like, okay, is the film trying to say something about mothers and motherhood? I'm not quite sure, and I might be wrong. What ends up getting revealed at the end is that the characters have stumbled upon a part of the desert that is a government restricted area. And they have seemed to cross over into some sort of Lovecraftian cosmic horror space. And within this space, all sense of linear time and reality is disrupted. So what you see is that the characters are actually caught in this loophole where they keep going back in time, they keep revisiting certain scenes that happened earlier in the film. And particularly with the character of Robbie, you see him just kind of going through this cyclical pattern where he runs into doppelgangers of himself, he runs into doppelgangers of his friends. He begins to lose his sense of self and who he is, which results in this violent rampage of him killing himself and his friends over and over again. Again, that's what I think was happening. Again, it was very dark and hard to tell, and I wasn't sure who was who. I actually didn't mind the darkness of it. I think the brief glimpses of the horror and then just relying on audio could have actually been very effective had the film had something to kind of ground it a little bit. Like, say what you want about Skinamarink. I know a lot of people did not like that film, but I feel like what Skinamarink did better than the Outwaters is that it gave you clues throughout the film as to what was happening. I know not everyone may agree with me on this, but I do think there were very clear hints and themes in Skinamarink around like family trauma, kind of tapping into that childhood uneasiness of coming from a broken home or coming from a home where abuse may be happening. Despite how abstract Skinamarink is, that theme of family and that connection to family was very clear throughout the film. And that's something that I didn't have with the Outwaters, or wasn't as clear. Again, I was like, is this an environmental story? Is this a story about motherhood? I was also thinking like maybe this is a commentary on Right, this notion that we have in our culture that if we just go out to nature, we can be reborn and re-find ourselves in natural environments. And this is like the nightmarish version of that scenario. Like, yes, you're gonna be reborn, but it's gonna be this very hellish experience. And that could have been cool, but again, I don't think that's what was happening in this film. I will say just some positives, that there are some very good shots throughout this film. There's the one scene where the characters are running through the desert and the camera is flipped upside down. And visually that looked very cool and was very trippy. There's also a lot of good gore effects towards the end of the film, and it is unsettling. Like, the filmmaker did do a good job of creating some very creepy imagery. I think my problem with the gore is that at times it felt a little over the top. If you've seen the film, you know the ending is one of the more gorier moments. Robbie is shown in the desert and he finds these sticks and his friends' heads are on the sticks. Why, I don't really know. And then to break this cycle that he's in, he decides to end his own life. And he does this in a very grotesque, over-the-top way where he grabs a stone from the ground and he cuts off his genitals and then he cuts through his stomach, so you just see his intestines like flopping out. And yeah, I mean, it looks good. It's definitely gory. It's definitely unsettling. But I was also like, why is this necessary? It just felt like it was there for the shock and awe rather than being a cohesive part of the overall narrative or the overall themes of the film. And I feel like that's what this film does a lot. I feel like it wants to use the gore and the shock imagery to make up for the fact that there's not really much of a story here. I think this also highlights how the film didn't really use its length to its advantage. This movie is almost 2 hours long, and I know a lot of people are complaining about the length of it. This was also a criticism of Skinamarink as well. And while I agree that Skinamarink could have trimmed a few minutes here or there, the length of Skinamarink very much matches this purgatory hell that the characters are in. The film uses its length to drag you through that experience, and again is very much making you feel like the characters, that you're just stuck in this never-ending purgatory situation. And again, I know not everyone is going to enjoy that, and that's fine, but I felt like the length in Skinamarink at least made sense given what the film was about. But you don't get that with the Outwaters. You get an hour of non-character development, and then you really only get 20 minutes of kind of the weird, experimental, Lovecraftian hell that these characters are in. And it feels very fast and quick compared to the beginning part of the film. And so had the film allowed us a little bit more time within this cosmic horror space, and to allow us as an audience to really understand the terror that the character of Robbie is going through, then I feel like the ending where he's ripping his guts out may have had more of an impact. As an audience, I may have understood his thinking of like, yeah, I need to end this and I just want to bleed out as quickly as possible. But again, I just didn't get that from the film. And so again, the ending felt like it was there for just one final shock value. I also had to laugh at the end credits of this film. So when the film begins, it sets itself up in the very traditional found footage way, where you have the title cards that are like, oh, this footage was found in the desert. It is now evidence at the police department. So it's giving you the sense that someone at the police station is watching this footage. And typically with found footage films, when it ends, it just ends, right? There's usually no credits, again, to keep up that illusion that this was real footage that was found out there in the world. And this film just completely disregards its setup and shows you these very elaborate, kind of traditional Hollywood credits with music and like effects on the titles. So I was kind of laughing at that. And then after the credits, the film takes a few minutes to show you photographs of all of the characters out in the desert. And I was like, what are we supposed to be gaining from this? Because if you're still thinking about the film within the context that it sets up, that this is evidence from a police department, then where are these photos coming from? Is it the police officers that are putting together this montage with all of this music? And why would they be doing that? That doesn't make any sense. There are mentions at the beginning of the film where characters will be filming and then you'll have someone like Robbie say like, oh, I'm gonna go back through the footage and get like still photographs that we can use as marketing. And so I was also like, is that what this is? Are these supposed to be those photos? Are these just other random photos that the police found within the film cards? I mean, to me, it didn't really feel like it was connected to the story. It just felt like this extra thing that the director wanted to put in there as just like a, hey, look at us out in the desert. Like, it just felt weird because, again, I was like, I don't care about any of these characters. Like, why are you showing me these photos? Am I supposed to feel bad at this moment? I guess that was the intention, but again, I was like, I don't really know who these characters are, so I don't really feel anything about this. I was also laughing at just the fact that the characters are going through this very cosmic Lovecraftian horror, and yet their cameras are still working this entire time. And whatever this cosmic demon is that's causing all of this chaos is totally fine with all of it being recorded. Again, I think just another limitation of the found footage genre. This film, as with many found footage films, I was just sitting there thinking, why is the camera still on? Your life is in danger. Why are you still recording this? So overall, not a huge fan of the Outwaters. I would be really careful about buying too much into the hype or the marketing of this film. It very much feels like the distributors and the people behind the film were trying to ride off the coattails of Skinnamarink success. Again, a lot of cool imagery and ideas throughout the film. I just feel like it needed stronger narrative, stronger thematics, stronger character development. Had the film had those elements, I think it would have been a lot stronger. So those are my thoughts on the Outwaters. Did you see the film? If so, what did you think about it? Let me know in the comments, and I will see you next time. Thank you so much for watching.